Thank you, Allison. The body of work that I'm going to talk about is called Detritus Accumulatus. It is a title I made up that basically translates to lots of junk, as you can see looking at it. Most of this work was part of my MFA master's thesis at Maine College of Art and Design. I graduated last year. And after I finished the program, Allison and I were talking, and Corso, who was the director at the time, and they were very kind. They were asking me about my experience, and I was sharing the thesis experience and how enthused I was about the research. And we started talking about where artists get their inspiration, the lineages that artists come from, and what fuels us, the things that we acknowledge and the things we don't. So from that came this show that we put together, and we were lucky to have 10 other just amazing artists, being one of them. So the fact that this idea came from my thesis, if you'll indulge me, I'm going to read just a few excerpts from my written thesis that puts this work into context. I was 2 years old when the 1970s dawned. I was 12 when the decade darkened, so it is probably no surprise that my art and I were influenced by a commercial and cultural phenomenon singularly associated with the 70s, and that phenomenon is shag carpeting. I was about 7, and my truck driver dad brought home from the road this stack of rectangular carpet samples. They were in these big books, and they were bound by silver bolts, and I heaved those things around for months. I'm flipping through this fascinating new world of vibrant color and plush texture, and you can't forget the synthetic smell. Frugal as ever, my dad soon decided we'd put the bright rectangles to practical use as a floor covering in the hallway. So my mom and he sewed dozens of those remnants together to create a one-of-a-kind rug that remained glued onto that floor, I think, for at least 25 years. I didn't yet understand the artistic concept of materiality, but those shag samples really just sparked an early activation of the senses for me, and an appreciation for texture and accumulation that are at the center of my art practice today. Sadly, those carpet samples were thrown away long ago. The carpet was ripped up and thrown out, and unfortunately, it lives in only one photo I've been able to find. It's not a particularly good photo, but it's still, that carpet is still very much a part of my creative psyche, and it fuels some of the work here. In 1961, MoMA staged an exhibition called The Art of Assemblage. It was a seminal exhibition, and it celebrated collage and accumulation and the use of found materials. It included a few pieces from the 19th century and earlier, but the vast majority of the works were created in the 20th century by then contemporary artists. Notable were early in the century collages by Picasso, Georges Braque, Kurt Schwitters, and Marcel Duchamp, and numerous then recent works by people like Louise Nevelson and Lee Montague, Robert Rauschenberg, and others. I've already heard Rauschenberg's name once tonight. You're going to hear it a few more times from me. At this time in 1961, he was already very well known for, you might say infamous, for his unique take on assemblage via what he called combines, which were these large three-dimensional works that featured not just paint and everyday materials, but occasionally shocking items like a stuffed goat that he encircled in a car tire. While he seemed unfazed by the very harsh, visceral, public, and critical reaction to these works, his intent, nevertheless, was not to shock or to offend. To him, the combines were just intimately personal. They included family photos and mementos that chronicled events of his life, and even paintings and drawings by his friends. Rauschenberg's combines came vividly to my mind on a cold January day last year. I was wandering my parents' property in rural Southwest Virginia just a week or two after my dad's death at age 85. And it seemed there was junk everywhere I looked, everywhere I pointed my camera. Over the years, I had frequently heard him utter the phrase, "Don't throw that away, I might need it someday." And here was vivid proof that he had lived by that adage. He had stored stuff seemingly everywhere on the property, piled beyond rafters in a log cabin he built in the 70s, in several outbuildings, carport, his basement workbench, bank cellar, an abandoned mobile home next door, and just heaps across the property. The next day, I gathered up just a very tiny sampling of his collections, including tubs of nuts and screws and washers, well-used tools, and a kitchen junk drawer that had long ago taken up residence in the basement, along with other stacks of junk. That drawer, which is now right there, was full and is full of dusty hardware and memorabilia, most of which I think is in there when I was born. And I also rescued remnants of a newspaper collection that I had amassed when I was an adolescent and teen in the 80s. And my dad had brought home those newspapers from the road. He'd also begun bringing home truckloads of granite that he salvaged from a quarry nearby. He taught himself how to cut stone by hand using chisels and a hammer into presentable blocks, and he began laying them in numerous projects around the property, a patio, retaining wall, a floor for his log cabin. And then around the turn of the 90s, he embarked on a more ambitious project, an entire house that he would build out of salvaged granite, perched into a mountain overlooking a lake. He designed and eventually constructed the house nearly all by himself. He worked on it for nearly 3 decades. He dubbed the house Sunshine Chalet, and today it stands as a stalwart testament to his resourcefulness. If you haven't seen it on my information panel, I have a photo of him and the house, so please check that out. So embedded in this work are numerous physical and metaphorical reminders of him and his building projects and his affinity for salvaged materials. The piece at the end is called My Dad's Detritus Granite Wall. And in that one, the accumulation built atop a photograph printed on canvas, mounted on wood, that I took of an exterior wall of the lake house showing its rows of granite blocks. I tore pieces of those newspapers from the 80s to fill in select blocks of granite. And I appreciated how the 3-dimensional textured layers of this ephemeral newsprint contrast with the 2-dimensional photographic representation of the durable granite. And embedded throughout are his tools and pieces of detritus. The second assemblage is My Dad's Detritus Junk Drawer, Virginia Apple Spots, and Other Stuff. Got real creative with that title. This one is a somewhat looser, I think, exploration of similar themes. Whereas the granite blocks on the first one it served as a grid, dictating a fairly intentional, orderly curation of material. The effect here was a little more freewheeling and 3-dimensional, and I likened this piece to the freeze frame of a Rube Goldberg machine. And the final piece of the My Dad's Detritus Triumvirate is this tall one, this tall skinny guy here. It's 700 pieces of washers and nuts strung on wire and anchored into a piece of My Dad's granite. So together, these pieces are simultaneously a memorial to a beloved dad, an homage to Rauschenberg for sure, and a study of balance between dichotomies, the dichotomies of old and new, between trash and treasure, order and chaos, and between discarded and discovered. The memorial nature of these works and their exploration of family history I place them within an artistic lineage populated by Rauschenberg and other very accomplished artists I admire. Among the artists I researched are Al Loving, Lee Montague, Abigail DeVille, and Mark Bradford. And I took a lesson from these artists, a very important one, that is that everything we make as artists is personal and ties to our biography, our lineage, and our life experience, whether we like it or not, or want it to be or not. Oftentimes that influence isn't apparent on the surface or even apparent in our minds as we make it, but it's there. Mark Bradford, for instance, is a world famous artist. He's in his 60s, yet the art he's making today is still directly influenced by growing up in South Central LA, working in his mom's hair salon for many years, and coming of age as a young gay man in the early years of the AIDS crisis. I love this quote from him where he says his practice is about, quote, decollage and collage at the same time. Decollage, I take it away. Collage, I immediately add it right back. It's almost like a rhythm. I'm a builder and a demolisher. I put up so I can tear down. I'm a speculator and a developer. In archaeological terms, I excavate and I build at the same time. How I love that description of the process. It's just so evocative. And through that lens, I would say that my art also swings between dualities of construction and deconstruction, and adding and taking away, a cohesive whole versus disconnected fragments. I won't go into it extensively here, but much of my thesis research was about the intersection of art and social dynamics in post-war, mid-20th century America. I looked a lot at the influence of abstract expressionism. Oddly, ABEX, despite being a movement whose central tenet was personal expression, it came to represent America globally at a time when social conformity and conservatism were the expectation. So I played a lot, or thought a lot about that. And I guess given its testosterone-heavy origins and manly declarations of strength, so aggressively expressed on its canvases, you can probably picture Jackson Pollock, ABEX was also an apt representative for the who's got the biggest tool Cold War posturing between the US and the Soviet Union in the 50s and 60s. Yet the artists weren't thinking about machismo or nationalism when they began creating the work that would define ABEX and create ABEX. Have any of you seen or read the book 9th Street Women by Mary Gabriel? What a fascinating book. I love it and I recommend it to everyone. I'm going to read a passage from that because she so beautifully describes the early motivation between these artists' work and what drove them. She said, it was born out of nearly 2 decades of trauma, resulting first from the Depression, then from the devastation and sacrifices of the Second World War. Mankind had unleashed its hidden beast, and the result was not only the tangible horrors of Auschwitz and Hiroshima, but a miasma of hatred, suspicion, and bigotry that lingered still. Under such circumstances, artists continued to work, but they could no longer paint or sculpt the reassuring things, the objects, landscapes, or people that had occupied their predecessors for centuries. I love that quote. And instead, the originators of ABEX, people like de Kooning and Lee Krasner, Jackson Pollock, Barnett Newman, they looked inward for their inspiration. And this quote from Newman pretty much sums it up. Instead of making cathedrals out of Christ, a man, or life, we were making it out of ourselves and out of our feelings. One frequent facet of my artistic expression that I didn't realize was there until I had to and research it and write about it is this facade reality relationship, and the study of mid-century America really fueled that, because there were often really grim, dark realities during that time that they contrasted with this projection of perfect domestic bliss. That really wasn't the case for everyone. So let me talk about the armature here in the middle. And these works are born from that exploration of facade and reality. They include photos I took of my dad's piles of junk and scenes of where I came from. And they're mounted on glass, and they're paired with several paintings that I painted onto glass. They're two-sided, where the story on one side can differ very greatly from the story on the back side, but I see them as one piece. So even though the story on the back and the story on the front are different, they feed off each other. And because of the transparency, one supports the other. And the stories can be altered further by reordering the paints. They're, in this armature, I have 4 tracks, so I can put up to 4 pieces in each one. I can flip it around, flip it upside down, throw one out, put another one in. After I had begun this work in particular in earnest, I realized once again that Rauschenberg was influencing me, even though I didn't realize it with this one. I came across a piece that he made in 1964 called Shades. It's a smallish aluminum box with 6 panes of plexiglass and a small light bulb in the back. Black and white lithographed images are mounted on each pane. One of the panes is fixed at the back, and the other 5 are movable. And this piece is at MoMA, and I had seen it at MoMA. And according to the museum, there's 6 billion possible permutations in that one small piece. I'm in math-averse, so I've not calculated how many permutations are possible in this one, but I am fascinated by the potential to tell so many different stories depending on sequence and order and orientation. One last artist I want to mention that I've studied is the American artist Jack Whitten. He was active starting in the 60s up until nearly the time of his death in 2018. He was famous for experimental processes that pushed the materiality of acrylic paint. He worked largely with these thick slabs created out of multiple layers of dried paint. Early in his career, he employed this enormous squeegee-like device that he made, that he raked over the top layers of wet paint in one continuous motion, yielding deep linear texture on the surface. Later, he started cutting the slabs into small pieces like the tiles of ancient Mediterranean mosaics. And he built these enormous pieces out of these mosaics that are just so layered, so evocative. I admire so much about Whitten, the way that his work is both painting and sculpture. He was really driven by scientific processes, and I love the way he thought about and talked about and wrote about his art. He kept volumes and volumes of a studio log for decades, and portions were published in a book called Cosmic Soul in 2022. In 1983, Whitten scribbled in his log, "I am the process." Among other highly quotable declarations, he wrote, I make a painting, I do not paint a painting. And the painting must be built like you are building a stone wall. So that, of course, brings me back to my dad. And the last thing I'll say is that in this body of work, and I've added 2 new pieces that you see here, and one that's down in the lobby this year, still pulling from that pile of junk, those tubs that will forever take up space in my studio until I get busy and make more pieces. But his processes and projects are my inspiration. His lessons taught, my lessons learned and applied. The resulting work is a dedication and memorial to the dude. When I spread paint with a squeegee, I'm mimicking and honoring his spreading order with a trowel. When I laminate pieces of paper, one on top of another, I'm laying proverbial blocks of granite. When I excavate layers of paint, My hands are chisels cutting curves on the face of a stone building block when I dig through tubs of washers, nuts, and bolts and find the perfect fastener of material to substrate. I am fulfilling his prophecy that that piece of hardware would indeed be needed again someday. And when I discuss this work, I do so with reverence and gratitude for his influence. So, thank you.